Welcome to the What It Takes podcast, where we talk to successful entrepreneurs, leaders, and CEOs across different industries. I'm your host, Darren, and in each episode, we're going to figure out how they got through difficult times, but most importantly, what it really takes to succeed. So whether you're just starting out your career or you're looking to level up your business game, my goal is to give you real insights and practical lessons from people who have achieved what you want. Welcome back to the What It Takes podcast. I'm joined today by Karim, who is a very inspiring entrepreneur. He has built up a business that works on helping youth from low-income communities access to resources and opportunities to really help them succeed. He's also an author, which is really cool. You had, was it 3 books, or you're writing your 3rd book now?
Writing the 3rd one, 2 published.
Writing the 3rd one. And I thought your story was very inspiring because you come from an immigrant background, first generation, and so far you've been able to build up a business that has helped more than 100,000 children, and your goal is to get up to 1 million by 2030, which is amazing. So Karim, thank you so much for joining the podcast, and very excited to talk to you and learn a little bit more about your journey and explore it for the rest of the audience. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Darren. I'm excited to be here and genuinely appreciate people like you who are out there really trying to inspire and uplift others along the way. So glad to be here.
Appreciate that, man. So one of the things that I want to dive into really to begin with here is your background. All right. You grew up as a first generation immigrant in a low income community. What was it like for you in the beginning when it came to accessing resources? How has that background shaped you across the years?
You know, as a child, you're ignorant to it, right? So you don't really know what you don't know. And so, yes, you know the little things that, like when you go to the supermarket or you go to the clothing store with your parents and they're like, no, you can't have that, or they don't get it for you. But even on the other side now, like I take my daughter places and she's like, this. And you obviously don't give them everything that they want anyway, because they don't know why they want it. I just didn't know it when I was really young, that it was because we couldn't afford it. So from that standpoint, I wasn't thinking about what we didn't have. As I started to get older and things got more difficult at home, yes, there were moments where my siblings and I were like collecting cans to recycle, to go and make a little bit of money so we can buy our lunch. I'm not proud of this, but we stole food, right, from supermarkets to make sure that we could eat what we wanted to eat. And back in the day, it was also easy to shoplift and take things from retail stores. And so we did that so we could close that gap. And I always, I think back to this one like axiom where they say, like, you know, are poor people poor because they do bad things, or are poor, or do poor people do bad things because they're poor? I mean, I'm now on the other side of it, always a believer that it's the latter. Sometimes your situation forces you to do things that you might not like morally be in line with. And as a child, you don't know any better. So I want to say there was always this conflict between like not knowing and maybe thinking what the right thing is and not doing it. And then as you get older, you start to realize what it was and being able to take control of that situation. And so I feel like my upbringing really grounded me. It inspired the work that I do today. So much of what I do is because of that circumstance and the environment that I came from. I don't know if you've ever listened to one of J. Cole's songs, but one of my favorite lines is that he says that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. And I really hang on to that because when I look at the communities, when I look at the children that I serve, not only do I see myself, but I see what's possible for them and what they could do for our world. So growing up as an immigrant, definitely challenging. Not having English be your first language in the United States. Growing up in a low-income neighborhood and environment, absolutely challenging, but I wasn't alone, and you're not alone. There's so many, actually more people like you that are there, and I think your attitude, your mindset, all of those things really matter. And, you know, for what it's worth, I never lose sight of the fact that I also got lucky, right? There's a lot of luck involved in getting out. So it's not enough to just work hard and do the right thing. There is an element of luck in all of it. And I'm happy to unpack that a little bit more, but definitely don't take that for granted.
When you say get out, what do you mean by get out? Get out
Yeah,
from circumstance or? that you're in?
That's a loaded word, right? And where are you escaping? What are you trying to get out of? And
Yeah.
it was a conflict that I had in college. I went to a very privileged Ivy League college where the tuition was $50,000 or $60,000 a year, and it's probably higher now. And I went on a free
Mm.
full ride.
Yeah.
And when we talk about getting out, when we were children, it was getting out of the hood. And the
Mm.
hood was short for the neighborhood that you didn't want to be in because
I heard about the hood. Yeah.
so when you're growing up in that environment, you're trying to get out, and not because you don't like the people, but because you're sold and taught to believe that all of the things that you need in your life that are going to make you happy are not there, right?
Yeah.
The money,
Right.
the more comfortable housing, the better food, the quality of your relationships, the things you can do. And that's not necessarily true. In fact, one of the biggest challenges I had when I got to college was fitting in, because
Mm.
I would meet a lot of kids who were growing up like me. In some ways, they had
Mm.
that same circumstance, but they benefited from someone in their neighborhood, family, or otherwise sponsoring them to go to really good schools when they were younger. And so
Mm.
they grew up almost outside of their neighborhood, and they would only be in their neighborhood to go home and sleep and whatnot. And then
Mm.
there are the kids who grew up in really privileged environments, like my daughter, for example. And then there was this small sliver of people who somehow like got through the hood that they were in and made it into this environment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I felt like for a lot of those kids who were growing up, who had gone to these elite schools as children, they couldn't relate to the elite kids who grew up that way the entire time. And now they couldn't relate to the
Yeah.
kids that they grew up with because they were
Yeah.
so disconnected and removed. And I, in some ways, felt that happening to me, but I said, that's not what I want, right? I want to go back and I want
Mm.
to make sure that more kids growing up in my neighborhood who are growing up just like me don't feel like they need to get out of anywhere, right? Because where are
Mm.
you
Mm.
running to? Where are you going to? So that
Mm.
way you can still be happy. And I mean, all of the science and the research around happiness, longevity, all of those things have very little to do with the space that you live in and more to do with the quality of your
Yes.
relationships, the food that you're consuming, the habits that you have around your health, your practice of gratitude, and those things are what make you happy, not the tangible like money that you get in the
Very,
process.
very true. I want to circle back to this, but I think for the audience, I want to sort of give them a brief overview because I did give you the introduction in the beginning, but I want to sort of highlight your journey. Because you grew up in the hood, all right, and you got to the point where you're at right now. Can you just quickly go through, your journey up until the point where you built your company, and then we're going to circle back and talk a bit about how that early experience shaped your journey.
Yeah, happy to. So went to a series of just growing up in a low income neighborhood, series of low income schools. And just by virtue of being in a low income neighborhood, the schools aren't that great.
Mm.
You have teachers who aren't there. There's teacher shortages, supplies that are short. And I remember as a kid when our teachers were absent or we didn't have a teacher assigned and we get sent to the
Mm.
auditorium, we were excited, man. Like we weren't sad that their teacher wasn't there. Like we were running through the hallways. We were giving the
Yeah,
substitute
yeah,
teachers hell. We're not sitting there thinking about how we were being robbed of our education. My
yeah.
high school, just to give you some numbers, had 4,400 children in it. I mean, high school for us is ninth grade to 12th grade. There were
Wow.
1,400 of those children in my ninth grade, the freshman year class. Only
Wow.
526 graduated.
Mm.
So the 6-year graduation rate, even though it's a 4-year high school like timeline, they published the 6-year graduation rate at the time, and it was 55%. So
Mm.
the education we were getting just wasn't amazing. The support systems weren't amazing, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't get out and do well. So
Mm.
I got lucky. I had a series of nonprofits and mentors who kind of intervened in my life. I took advantage of the help and the resources that were there. I was the first one to graduate high school in the United States. And then, even though I have an older brother, we finished around the same time. And then, first one in my family to finish college. And I'm one of seven. So I'm the second oldest of seven. So as you can imagine, that doesn't make things any easier. My
Yeah.
father passed away when I was 14, turning 15, like just at that early piece. But I just was sick the last couple of years also, really wasn't doing much to help our family out. And I feel like that wasn't a viable option or route, just going after and following in his footsteps in some ways. And so my siblings and I were the ones really like paying rent, mean, I felt like I've been working since I was a little kid and really just trying to make sure that our family was well. And I always tell, like, people would come to me and ask me, like, I don't know how you did it. I don't know, like, at that age, why you were supporting your family in that way. Like, so many other kids would have walked away, and it was selfish. I just had this picture of my family potentially being in the streets. And, in middle school and high school, kids are mean, man. And so the thought of someone passing my family by on the streets or seeing that and, like making fun of us, like that drove me, the fear of something like that happening, like really pushed me to make sure that my family was okay. So did really well in high school. I listened to some guy who came in one weekend and said education was the way out and that was going to change my life. And honestly, I had nothing else to hold on to. And so I said, why not believe this guy? I have nothing else that I could possibly believe in. And I went all in on my education. I graduated at the top of my class in high school, went to my local city university my freshman year and got a 4.0 my first year and used that as an opportunity to transfer, went to an elite college. That's when I started to learn about the inequality. But when you grow up poor, you're thinking, I want to be rich. And so I did my internship on Wall Street at Goldman Sachs and at BlackRock, two of the world's largest investment bank and money manager. And then when I was getting ready to graduate college, I turned down my full-time offers. So I started my company my sophomore year of college. It was originally a side project as a way to just give back and pay it forward. And I used to think I'm going to make all this money on Wall Street. I need to put my money somewhere. And I want to help kids growing up just like me. This is the way to do it. And by the time I was getting ready to graduate, I just felt like God was ordering my steps in a way that was calling me to do this work and gave me a bigger reason to be here than just to make money. It was really about how do I use this education that I had received now, my own experience, to create pathways and opportunities again for kids growing up just like me and use it as a model, especially around the time I was coming out, to do good and do well, right? How do I do good in the world and do well financially instead of trying to maximize one or the other? How do I maximize the intersection of both?
Yeah.
So that's how I got to where I'm at today, as short as I can give it to you.
Yeah, no, that was incredible, man. That was incredible. And I think, the fact that you've been able to help more than 100,000 children today really speaks volume of the quality of the work that you've done. Now, one of the things that you mentioned as well early on was access to mentors, right? I mean, I think, and not just you, but most people that grow up in low income communities, my perception and my view on this is that they don't have always, at least, the right role models to guide them. You mentioned that you had a mentor in your early days.
Yeah, I would actually say it was more of a role model first. And I think there's a distinction. A mentor knows that they are playing an active role in shaping your life. A role model might not. And a role model could be dead, they could be alive, right? And we all have the ability and the access to have role models. And the role models are who we choose to follow. Yeah. So I don't ever want to discount the role that teachers played in my life, but I don't know that I had an active sponsor until I got to college. Then that role was formalized. There was one gentleman in particular that I always think back to. His name was Eddie Rodriguez. He ran one of the nonprofit organizations that I took part in. And when I say luck, in Outliers, they talk about outliers not being any different than us. They just were given an opportunity to work hard, right? They're at the right place at the right time with the right condition. And that happened for me in high school, where this billionaire hedge fund manager funded a program that paid kids to pass advanced placement courses. All that said, I got to my senior year. I passed a couple of these exams. There were other schools in my city that also participated, but there were a lot more that didn't have that incentive. And so kids were still passing and doing the same work and they didn't get paid for it. And that wasn't lost on me. And so when I got my last check, I remember going up to Eddie Rodriguez, who was the executive director at the time. And I was just so grateful. I was just thank you so much. I appreciate it. The year before I'd gotten my first check from them. And the year before I was skeptical. I was this can't be real. And when you're growing up poor, you don't want a handout. A lot of people think you want a handout. You don't want a handout. You don't want to owe someone something, right? When someone gives you something, you automatically think I owe them something. I don't want to owe anyone anything, right? So I don't need your help. I don't want your help. I want to figure out how to do this on my own. And in some ways, I passed an exam that other kids were passing too, and I was getting paid for it and they weren't. And so I remember going up to him and saying, thank you so much. Like, if there's anything I can do for you, like, let me know. And I always laugh when I think back to that scene, because Eddie before that was a successful corporate lawyer. And here I was, this, like, at the time, maybe 17-year-old, like, inner city kid with nothing. Like, that check, like, half of that check was already spent, right? I'm going to put it into a bank account that luckily won't bounce, but there's not a lot to give, even though, like, I'm grateful and I want to help. And I just think back to that scene, and Eddie said the most powerful thing in the world to me in that moment that also, like, transformed the way I think about and see the world. And he said, there's nothing you can do for me, just pay it forward. And so I take that, seriously. And in some ways, like, it drives me every single day, because when I pay it forward, I feel like I'm making good on that promise or that, like, handout in some ways that I was given before. So I'm in some ways paying it back.
Yeah, that was a real profound thing, what he said to you, because that has also been one of the things that's been driving you since.
Yeah, I meet so many people today who say, like, oh, I didn't have a mentor, so why should I care about this? Like, no one did anything for me. And the reality is, like, it has to start somewhere with someone. And we know what the power of it could be. And just because you didn't have it doesn't mean that it's not something that you can't give to someone else.
So, you get out of college, you had the jobs, BlackRock, right? And what was that journey for you like to start your own business? How did that look like? What was the moment where you said, I'm going to do this?
So there were two different moments. The first moment is when I was in college, my sophomore year, and I'm like, I'm going to do this because no one else is doing anything about it. I learned about the research. It just, like, it was keeping me up at night. And someone like somewhere had to do something. And at 18, you think you can change the world. And so I was like, I'm going to be that someone, because I don't see that someone anywhere else. So that was the first moment. And then I'm getting ready to graduate college, and now it's a different moment. Do I take this full-time job offer, making $70,000 a year with benefits, bonus, and obviously this fast track career? Or do I turn that down to make potentially nothing in the process? And as attractive as the offer was and amazing as the company it was that I had interned at, like, I loved my experience at BlackRock as an intern. So it had nothing to do with that, and everything to do with this feeling that this is what I was supposed to be doing. And so I had people in my life who were telling me I was crazy. There were 10,000 applicants for the internship opportunity at BlackRock my junior year, and they picked 100 people. And then of the 100, they only made a full-time offer to 40. And so I had one of 40 offers out of the 10,000 people they went through. And so I was instead thinking, like, what is it that they see in me that I don't see in myself? And what is it that I can do for others that I'm not currently doing? And so I had folks around me at my university, other successful entrepreneurs, who all said the same thing. Like, success is not guaranteed, but it only gets harder from here. And if you're going to do anything, like, do it now, right? Because you don't have the mortgage, you don't have the family, you don't have that same risk. And $70,000 was a lot of money for someone who didn't have anything in their savings account. But it wasn't going to change my family's life. And, I don't say this lightly, right? But when you're used to living with nothing, you can continue to survive, right? It's not like the status quo is broken, at least in America, where you have the social safety net the way that it was. I mean, it wasn't like the little bit of money I was going to make extra after all of that rent and stuff was going to change my family's life. It wasn't a life-changing amount of money. It wasn't millions of dollars. And so I thought to myself, like, I can do this for a couple of years and see what happens. And if everything fails, I have a really compelling story for business school, and I'll go down that route again and go back into financial services. And so the real moment of truth was deciding for myself what it was that I wanted to do. And I think a lot of times, like, mentors, like, struggle with this, which is they want what's best for their mentees. And I had several mentors in my life that I alienated in the process, because they felt like the most compelling thing I can do is take this full-time offer, right? These offers aren't given lightly. You don't get another shot at it from their eyes. And, in some ways they felt like that was their responsibility, was to help coach me and navigate me into taking that job offer. And I remember looking at another mentor who was at the time, like, in his 30s. And I thought, man, he's so old. Like, now I'm in my early 30s. So I'm, like, just trying to recreate that. And he's
You're not old,
making
man. You're
he's
young.
making
You're
he's
young.
making money in private equity. And I looked at him and I was like, this guy's really not that happy.
Yeah.
And at this point, like, I had an incredible college experience, and I like got to be the leader of student clubs, and got to take so many leadership roles on. And I learned really early on that when things aren't going well and you're the one responsible, like, it feels really, really lonely. When things are going really well, like, there's support, there's encouragement, everyone's there, they're around you, they're egging you on, keep going, and you would hate to grow up and be the person who's like, I don't care about anyone. I don't want anyone around me ever, because if they're not going to be there when it's tough, I don't want them around when it's good. But I had a very different mindset. I said, when times are tough, that's fine. I expect that they won't be there. And when times are great and they're there, like, I want them there, and I want them encouraging, and why not? The more the merrier. Let's take advantage of it. And the one thought that I had in my mind was, if I looked in the mirror, 10, 12 years from then, and I wasn't happy, like, who would be there? Is the question that I asked myself. And
That's
I
a good
came to
question.
the conclusion that no, like, the only person who would be there is actually the person looking back at me in the mirror.
Yeah.
So it would only be me. And if I was happy, who would be there? Like, everyone and their mother would be there. And again, like, the more the merrier, bring them on. But if I made a decision that was going to possibly make me unhappy, I wanted to make sure that the person who made that decision was standing there looking right back at me in that mirror. And so that wasn't a, hey, you should go do this or do that moment. That was whatever the decision is, I need to own it, because I'm the only one accountable for my life at the end of the day. And it's amazing. A lot of people have very traditional careers and they go down that and things work out and it's great. And people take risks and they don't work out, and that's fine too. We learn from them, right? There's a lot of quotes out there that say, like, we never fail, right? We succeed or we learn. And so I said, if this fails, I'm not really failing, I'm learning from it. But regardless of what the decision is, I want to make sure the person who makes it is standing right there with me. And I made the difficult decision at the time to turn down my offers and move forward with it. And the reality is, for months after, I continued to get other full-time job offers. And I don't know if it's still the case today, but I genuinely believe that if you are smart and you are really hardworking, you have a strong work ethic, that there will always be a job or an opportunity out there for you. And so that is like betting on yourself 110%. That fear of, oh my God, I made the biggest decision of my life, I'm never going to have an opportunity like that again, went right out the window, because I knew that I was going to put in the work, regardless of where I was, and I was going to make the time to learn, educate, and build myself up. And so if I wasn't going to take this offer, that doesn't mean I was invaluable anywhere else and that I would have that opportunity again.
Yeah. But I mean, it takes an incredible amount of self-belief, right? To turn down job offers, to turn down the advice of mentors that you had at the time who told you all to go for that job, right? And I think that a lot of other people who probably who, if they were in your shoes, would have probably taken that job, right?
Yeah, you make
And
me
so,
sound really great, calling it self-belief.
no, but I mean, what is the biggest difference there? Because
There's conviction.
you have to have that level of, like, I am going to make this. And you were obviously saying, like, hey, if I fail, I fail. And then it's going to be a lesson for me. I'm going to learn from it. And if I succeed, I succeed, right? But, like, if you had to look at most other people out there, do you think they would make the same choice? And if not, why not? What do you have? What is the quality that is required to sort of go and do that?
Yeah, I mean, I had an incredible amount of conviction in what I was doing, and faith. If you don't believe in something bigger than yourself, and that something out there is like divine and moving you and ordering your steps and having things happen for you, like, you're not alert enough to see those
Passion,
things happen.
purpose.
It's the purpose element, right? I felt like I had found my purpose. And so I don't
Yes.
know if this wasn't purpose-driven work that I would have done it. The other way you could look at it is I had an incredibly high risk tolerance, right? Even when you look at the behaviors as a kid, like shoplifting, because there's other poor people who don't shoplift at that age. I was willing to take the risks. And so I learned this because when I was getting ready to graduate, I had another friend who was saying they were going to go and do this with me full time. And I said, great, let's go ahead, let's do it. And as we were getting closer and closer to graduation date, he started interviewing for jobs.
Right.
And then ultimately took a full-time job offer. And man, I didn't talk to him for months. Like that friendship to me was like dying or dead. It wasn't until a couple of years later that folks were telling me like, yo, that was crazy. Like I can't believe you did that. And I took a step back and reflected, and I was like, oh my God, that's so right. I had an incredibly high risk tolerance that most people don't have. So I was comfortable doing something like that because of the way I was wired. And I didn't see it as being as risky as it actually was. Like I had de-risked it in my mind, right? Oh, I'll apply to grad school. I came from nothing. I'm comfortable, and I built myself up here. I'm comfortable rebuilding that again, right? I'm not afraid of that. And so I rationalized so many of the risks that to someone else, still might be completely irrational. But to what I said at the very beginning of it, there was an incredible amount of conviction that I was put on this earth to do this work. And that's what was driving me. If you don't believe in that, it doesn't matter what the opportunity is. You're not going to take a leap like that.
Yeah, no, I can relate a little bit to what you were saying about the risk thing, because it's, I can see the risk, but I always rationalize it. And when I tell people, like when I left my job in London, the CEO job, right? People are like, "You're crazy, man. You are crazy. Like, how could you do that? How could you give up the salary? How could you do?" That's a purpose. I have belief that I'm gonna make this work. I'm gonna make this happen. And in my head, when I look back at it, I'm like, I could have probably done it a little bit different because I left my job without having zero plan. I just knew I had a purpose, but I didn't know how I was going to manifest it, right? So technically it was a very risky move, but I rationalized it, right? And it's also that risk tolerance. One thing I wanted to talk to you about as well is, so, you found your purpose, which was, of course, helping children from low-income communities. That purpose that you got, that was obviously shaped from your background, but what are some of the issues there? What are some of the issues that they face in schools, in the communities, the students? What are some challenges that they have?
I mean, I honestly think one of the bigger pieces is the inequality. Because if you go back 100, 200, 300 centuries ago, people were living with so much less than they live with today. Whether it's food, housing, clothing, healthcare, all of these things, like modern science, everything has made things so much easier, but it's also made it so much more inequitable. And so much of our suffering is measured relative to how other people are suffering, right? It's not fair for someone to not get quality healthcare when someone else can for the same exact situation. It's not fair to be living without clothing when other people live with clothing. It's not fair for us to not have an adequate meal and nutrition when other people can have an adequate meal and nutrition. And that does something to you psychologically. It is a psychological, mind, mess up when you're going through it. So I think we start there. Yes, we can talk about the poor school environments, the mental health issues and challenges of living in poverty that perpetuate and make things more difficult at home for children. Yes, we can talk about the disparate access to healthcare and health insurance. So there are all of these things, but I think it's the inequality that really makes it worse. That there is a group and several different tranches of our society that just by virtue of where they're born and who they're born to live a very different life than someone who's growing up in poverty. And then poverty is also not equal everywhere in the world. Poverty in the United States is like luxury in some of our developing countries on a comparative basis. And you read all these happiness studies, and it's not about how much you have. A lot of it is about how much you have relative to the people who are around you. So, and even Harvard did this study maybe a decade ago that I always reference, which is that people would rather be the highest paid person in a company where they're making less than in another company where they're the lowest paid person, but they're making more than. So I would rather be paid $100,000 a year and be the highest paid person in my company than be making $500,000 a year and be the lowest paid person in that company, even though I'd be making more there. So, because my purchasing power, my status, my ego, everything else is tied to that. And the companies now think about it as a community or a city or a society. So it's not that granular anymore, right? Especially when we can work for anyone, anywhere, and our income can come from multiple streams. So it's not that straightforward anymore, but that's interesting, right? When you think about that so much of it is relative. So I don't I don't like to go into all of these issues there. And in fact, like what I try and do is I try and get people to think about the assets that they have access to. You know, I had to be a lot more frugal when I was starting out because I understood the value of a dollar. I had to be a lot more creative because I had to stretch the little bit of resources that I needed. And those are skills when you're building a company or building a business. Those things are valuable. I had to be able to be a lot more confident and outgoing. You know, like one of the things I see about the children that I work with is there's that shy factor isn't the same, right? Like I don't mind going up and approaching a stranger and having a conversation with them in a way that I see from folks who are maybe trying to be more polite, maybe don't understand like the social cues or the graces in the same way. And so they're more risk averse. When you have something to lose, you're always afraid about that. And so you play defense. When you have nothing to lose, like you go on offense, right? Because what do I have to lose in the process? If they score another point on me, it's not like I'm going to win the game. Right. So I need to go out there and try and do more. So I always think like, how do we think about the assets that we have access to? What are the things that are going to help build us up? How do I get people externally to change their perception of the communities and the neighborhoods that we're in? Because it changes how we operate and deal with folks. Right.
That's very interesting.
If we think they're robbers, they're thieves, they're this, they're that, all these negative things, then yeah, what's the point of being there? Versus if we instead change our mindset and say, hey, the next Einstein, the next Obama, the next whoever is going to change our world, we know this, could be living anywhere, right? Anywhere in the world, then it changes how we approach our investment. It changes how we approach the community, and it changes what we think of when we look at value. So I like to say, like, you know, where you are doesn't ultimately like dictate where you end up, but it also, we have the same DNA and the same genes from that standpoint, because we're all human, and which means
we're all human. Yeah.
We all can have the same potential.
Yes. And one of the things that you said right there is like you don't focus on the issues. Rather, you know, it sounds to me like you're more focused on the solutions, right? What works? What can you change? How can you provide that help? How can you make a difference in those lives? What for you has been, you know, one of the things that you've seen has had the biggest impact? Because you do a lot of different stuff. You do, you know, tutoring, you offer all these different services, right? Which one has been the most effective for you in creating change like that?
I mean, we started the conversation here, but putting a positive role model in a child's life, like that, when you talk about changing lives, like that is life-changing. Kids don't see their teachers when they're younger as being the person that they want to become, right? Like I get a lot from my teacher, but that's my teacher. So when we push in folks, and we call them education champions. Right? Because they're going into a school, they are the role model. Yes, they're helping them with their math, their reading, their writing, but that is a positive adult figure that they're looking up to and want to be like. And so it's important for us that when our education champions are in schools, that they're embodying what it is we want kids to do. When I was younger, I didn't do bad things because I wanted to be a bad kid. I did bad things because that's what the older kids were doing. And what the older kids do are the things that are cool. And I realized this in college, right? When I was meeting kids who went to good schools, it was cool to be the captain of the yearbook, the editor of the newspaper. Man, you would get bullied and picked on if you did either of those things in my high school, right? The yearbook, that was the nerd. And so I was like, it's the same exact thing, but it's viewed and perceived very differently depending on the context and the environment that you're in. And it was the same thing as a kid, right? You follow, that's like the reality of it. And one of the things that I always tell folks is like, we are all teachers, regardless of whether or not we realize it. Someone a few years or our age is looking at us and they're deciding what they're going to do with their lives. So consciously or unconsciously. And so whether or not we are intentional about what we teach, it's happening. Someone is looking at you today and deciding what they're going to do with their life because of just what you're doing. And so, you know, like Gandhi is.
But what about the relationships that the kids have to their parents? I mean, the parents are a huge role model, not necessarily always, but at least a child will always learn from their parents from a young early age until they start understanding and become a little bit more self-aware. Parents affect the development of a child and how they view the world, their perspective, and the growth that they will have.
This was decades ago for me, but I read that like up until 5, the parents are the biggest role model. After 5, it's their peers.
Yeah, I heard 7, but it's okay. It could be like 0, 7.
It's early
0, 5,
though,
but
right?
it's early, yes.
You know, you start wanting to fit in. We're social creatures. We want to be accepted. We want to be liked, and our parents have to love us unconditionally. The people we meet don't. And so if we want to fit in, if we want to get invited to the birthday parties, if we want to get picked for the sports teams, like we need to be liked. And so we try a lot harder because of that. So I always tell people, like, if you want to influence your kids, like influence their friends, because your kids will do what their friends are doing. Otherwise, like you have a very little shot at making a difference there. You can pick which friends they're going to have by deciding where you're going to live and what school you send them to. But besides that, like when they're out there, they're out there. You can't really influence it more than that. But, I was saying, like, be the change, right? Gandhi says that, like, be the change you wish to see in the world. You get to a point where you realize, like, you can't physically change someone else, but people are always watching. And so the best thing you can do is be a role model, right? Like model what it is you want other people to do. So, and I live my life that way. How is it that I would want other people to act? Like, I feel like I'm a walking teacher in some ways without having to correct or give a lecture or a presentation, right? I want my way of life to inspire others, to educate them, to see that there is a possibility and there's a way to do it that is aligned with who it is they can be, without having to say, hey, go and do good in the world. Hey, there's more than just making money. Hey, you should help other people. No, like I don't need to say all of those things. I just need to do it. And as I do it, other people will see and be inspired by that. And that's how they're going to learn. No one likes to be told what to do, right? They want to discover it on their own and then say, you know what, this resonates and aligns with me. I want to do that.
That is very true. I can very much relate to that as well. I've always been not against, but I've had a challenge issue with authority. So when people tell me what to do, it's like, don't tell me what to do, even if it's the right thing to do. I got to figure it out myself.
Show me.
Right? It's show me, guide me instead. Right? I think that is, and I think a lot of people are like that as well. It's not just against authority. It's just more about, like, you want to have a little bit of ownership. And it's going back to what you said early on, where, people don't just want a handout. It's like, here, sucker, you need this. Like, take it, right? Like, no, you want to earn it. You want to get it yourself. One thing that I'm very interested in is also with your business, right? Because you've had this now for several years, and throughout this journey, there have obviously been ups, a few downs. What have been some of the biggest challenges that you faced throughout building your business?
I mean, early on, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that is part of what gives you the confidence to sort of start. And I think as you get older, you lose a lot of the idealism, the creativity, because reality hits you, right? So I can have this like wish, this idea, and go out there, and then you're like, now I know why that doesn't work. Or, there's luck is a big element in a lot of what I do and have done and have gotten to. And I don't underestimate that. Like, God forbid I had a huge health challenge the year after I graduated college. That would have completely changed like what I was able to do, right? Because I wouldn't have had the funds to do anything about it. And then I wouldn't have had the energy. And so, I don't take any of that for granted. But that doesn't mean that even when things are going right, that there aren't challenges, but the challenges are more self-inflicted wounds because you don't know any better. And I think one of the most like pivotal moments for me was nearly bankrupting the company in 2017, early 2018. So
what happened?
They say like cash is king, and so we were growing really quickly, and I used our historical growth rates to forecast our future growth rates. I had gotten rid of the board because I felt like the board that I had built at the time wasn't serving me, when the reality was I didn't know how to manage the board. And so instead of thinking like, oh, I'm the problem, let me go and learn and get better at it, I said, this is the problem. And I was identifying the wrong problems. But of course, it's not one mistake that gets you there to get to near bankruptcy. And I remember the moment I had like over $1.5 million in debt to my name. I didn't even have any collateral. So I'm like, I don't even know how I got access to that much cash. But we over forecasted or over projected, which a lot of companies do. It's just natural part of the growth phase. We spent money before we made it. That not a lot of people do that, but we did because we were doing it in anticipation of the growth. I promoted people who didn't have the right skills or experience for the jobs. And again, like that was on me. We took on factoring money. So these factoring companies that are out there, they are very common in the restaurant industry where they'll lend you $10,000 at 10% a week or something like that. So we were doing that to collect our invoices. Again, no board, so there was no budget approval process. There's no one to force the thinking. So I have like a list of a dozen things that I remember happened. And I think the more important thing is like, how did you get out of it?
Yeah, that was my next question, right? Like, what was your mindset like? How did you get through that?
Yeah,
What's
that
going through
same
your head?
level of like purpose and conviction I had my senior year when I was graduating is what drove me again. Because at one point
Mm,
I remember feeling like I was in the middle of an ocean, it was pitch black, and I was in a rowboat. There's no
mm,
idea, like I had no idea which way to go, but I knew if I
mm.
stopped rowing, the boat would sink.
Yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah.
like
So you just have to
that's
keep going.
I kept rowing because I thought about the kids that we were serving. I thought about at that
Mm,
point, like a few thousand children had been through our programs, folks who had worked for us. And I just couldn't fathom the idea of this like disappearing from their resumes. I
mm,
always like wanted to be the one running this business. And I wanted to see it through the end of my life. And that almost was my becoming my purpose, like in some ways. It was
mm,
me running this forever instead of, making sure that no child's circumstance limits their potential. And I
mm.
lost sight of that it had become more about me running it than the work that we were actually doing. And that was the first piece, is shifting. The reason why I was
Mm.
doing this wasn't about me. It was about ensuring that our children's circumstances didn't limit their potential. Everything
Yeah,
else didn't matter. And if I was willing
yeah.
to run every decision through that microcosm of, is this getting us closer or further away from that, I would have been a lot more disciplined and I would have made better decisions. And it
Mm,
became a lot less about me and more about that. And then that started the
mm,
learning journey. I rebuilt the board. I got a lot better with our forecasting. And again, like I keep bringing up luck, like there were lucky moments. I had people who lent me money to bail me out of a tough situation. And I
mm,
didn't have wealthy people around me who could write those kinds of checks. And so I had people who were
mm.
going into their savings, which I would never recommend, right? Their life savings to do it because that was risky.
Yeah.
And I somehow convinced them that it wasn't risky, and luckily made good on all of it and was able to turn the ship. But it was a deep, like a
Good
steep learning
salesman as well then,
process.
huh? Yeah, and like as I was saying, you're a good salesman then if you're able to convince them of that. But for you then, it sounds like you just had two choices there, right? Like it was either you die, you sink, or you keep going. Because in reality, I mean, there are probably so many other alternatives that you could have gone for. It's like, okay, well, I'm nearing bankruptcy. I could always just go back to get a job. But for you, in your mind, it was two choices only. Like you didn't even consider the other options. And that is, I think, really cool. So obviously you need to work hard. You need to have the habits, the consistency there. And I know that a lot of people watching this either are entrepreneurs or they want to become entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I talk about, and I've worked with a lot as well, is consistency and eliminating bad habits and introducing healthy habits. For you, what has that been like? What habits would you say and routines have been very important in your success that you've implemented?
I'll give you the one that I think has been the most important, because I think there's a lot out there, but waking up really, really early. And I on
Really early or just
really,
like
really right now, like my average wake up time is 3:40 in the morning. And that's the
3:40?
time some people go to sleep. And the reason why I say that one has been one of the most important, and I worked my way back. I wasn't always waking up at that time. It was 8, then 7, then eventually 6:30, then 6, then 4:30, and now I'm at
Yeah, yeah.
40. The reason why I say that is one of the most important is because it forces you most nights to go to bed early.
Mm,
And when you have an earlier end to your day, you have to be a lot more decisive about what it is you're willing to sacrifice sleep for or what you're willing to sacrifice your morning for. I love my mornings. The mornings
mm,
are my most valuable time. It's when I work out, it's when I meditate, it's when I get some of my most productive work done. And
mm.
so if I stay up too late and I have to get up, that means I'm either going to sleep in or I'm going to miss my wake up. I have to be a lot more intentional about what it is I'm deciding to spend my time on.
Mm, mm.
So I'd
But you're
say like
mentioning
that. That's like
yeah, you're mentioning
that's the one that I would leave folks with instead of going into a whole list of them is start waking up early. It's going to force you to go to sleep earlier and it'll probably squeeze a lot of things out of your life that aren't serving you at night.
But you're also mentioning here exercise, you're mentioning meditation. It sounds like you're doing deep work in the morning. I mean, people don't wake up at 4 a.m. People go to bed, as you said, right? So there is not a lot of emails coming in, probably, not a lot of phone calls you got to make. So I assume that time would be spent for deep work. Does that also help you focus on just like being in the zone, or?
It does, but I'd say like you're going to figure out how to use that time. Like if you force yourself to wake up early, you will eventually figure out productive ways to use that time. Like the things I'm doing, yes, you'll get there. But if you're asking me like, what's the one habit that I need to build or start with? It's try and figure out how to wake up earlier, which implies how do I get to bed earlier consistently? And so what things do I need to get good at saying no to? Because on that road to getting to wherever you want to get to, you're going to have to say no a lot more than you say yes.
Yeah. And what about some bad habits that you think are absolutely destructive to a person who wants to succeed, but may not be very aware of it?
I'd say drinking, smoking, partying late, gambling. Like I think those are the vices that people think of. And you can do those things in moderation from time to time, but you do those things consistently because that's what's happening when you're staying up late. Right. Or you're binge watching television or movies that aren't serving you either. So you could probably put that on there. Very few people are at the gym at night, right? Doing that. Very few people are journaling at night. Very few people are doing deep work at night. So what's happening at night? Like you're drinking, you're clubbing or partying, you're smoking, you're doing some other drug, whatever. All the things that happen at night as you get older that aren't serving you. And those kill your next day. They might kill your next couple of days. They change the people that you're around. And then you're around other people who are just like that, right? So it's harder to change when that becomes your reality.
And what about like, because I know, I'll talk to people that know that drinking is bad for them. Smoking is bad for them. Eating junk food is bad for them. Like they know, but they don't do anything about it. Why is that? Why don't people... What's the deal there? How do you do it? Because you see it, that, hey, look, if I don't do this, I'm not going to get to where I want, right? If I don't wake up early, I'm not going to have as productive a morning. What's the difference there? How do you understand that knowledge and take action with it?
So I'll give you the research. There's a term called the insight action gap. So what you're talking about is that, right? We all have the insight that we need, but we sometimes don't follow through on the action. And the only way around that is to you take the self-awareness and then you choose differently. But the deeper, more personal answer, which I think Napoleon Hill uncovered in his book, Think and Grow Rich, and he uses the word desire. And so do you have a vivid enough picture or set of goals or purpose that is driving you, that has created the desire for you to achieve it? And when you have that level of clarity and that desire to achieve that thing, then all of these vices, these bad things that are pulling you away from it, like become secondary. They become a lot easier to say no to, a lot easier to sacrifice, a lot easier to turn away from. So often what is missing is an image that you desire, that you are willing to make those sacrifices and changes for.
Yeah. So it's really about you have to visualize what you want, right? Visualize the goal, be very aware of like, hey, this is what I want to achieve. Then you're able to clearly see what is serving you and what is not serving you. So,
and be clear on why you want to achieve that. Like why you really want to achieve that has to drive you. It's not just, I want to have a fancy house. I want to help my family out, but why? Do you really care about that? And when you get to the bottom of that place where you've picked something that is authentic, genuine to you, and you deeply care about it, you are going to make the sacrifices that you need.
Is there any practical way to figure that out? I mean, for someone who might be uncertain about what is it that drives them, how do they figure that out?
I mean, religion does this. Go out there and serve, right? Like go out there and volunteer, start to give back, help other people. And in the process, you'll find out what you're gifted at. And if you don't, you'll at least be a lot closer to it. But a lot of our purposes start out as passions.
Awesome. So going out there, figuring out what it is, just volunteering, being someone who essentially searching, right? Searching for the answers is what you're saying is the key to figuring that out.
Part of it, right, is experimenting. What are the things that you're passionate about? How do I do more of them? Are they calling me? Am I making a difference? I say, like, go out and serve, like, go out and volunteer, do community service, like, try different things that way. I mean, I think that's one of the most like effective ways. Care about something other than yourself and see where that drives you.
It's amazing. So one thing that I want to focus on for the last little bit here is your focus moving forward. Your goal is to help 1 million children by 2030.
Million low-income children. I love all children.
Low-income children. Yes. What is your plan? What are you going to do to get there?
I need to partner with as many schools and school districts as possible. So when I started doing my work, I used to work directly with low-income kids and families. And one of the challenges I saw is that low-income kids and families are really fragmented. And there's really two channels, at least in the United States, where they're more organized, and that's through hospitals and through schools. And so I didn't really understand the hospital system, but I understood schools. And I instead tried to figure out how is it that I could partner with and work with schools and school districts that already have this scale to help ensure that children growing up like me in the pockets of the schools that they're working with get the resources and the opportunities that they deserve. And so we're on that path. I mean, of that 100,000, 60,000 were served last year. So we've been growing incrementally every single year. And if I go back 15 years ago in our very first classroom, we started with 30 kids, 40 kids. Hopefully we'll continue to snowball and build and serve more and more kids every single year.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So the goal is to partner with as many schools as possible. Have you thought about going international? Is that something, or partnering with businesses or companies from abroad to further your impact? If it's low leverage, I mean, high leverage to do.
One day, I think you don't want to lose focus. I think right now where we're at, because we're intentionally taking the right next step. And I think that's how we have to think about it. But yeah, no child's circumstance limits their potential. Like that's the purpose, that's the vision behind what we're doing. And that's what we're pushing for. I mean, no child is not exclusive to the United States. So one day, but I think right now we're trying to put one foot in front of the other and continue to grow that way.
Amazing. So one final question for you. What does it take to succeed?
I think we've covered it in so many ways, right? It's that desire to want to be successful. So start with that. I think everything else you'll figure out after.
Desire.
Right? Yeah. Do you know what it is you like, why you want to be successful? What is the success you want to have? Have that clarity, and then are you willing to sacrifice for it? And a lot of that sacrifice will come in the form of learning. Okay, well, how do I become more efficient? How do I become better? How do I use my time in a more strategic way? What kind of family do I want to have? What are the things that are going to build me up instead of break me down? But start there, right? That desire to want to be successful. You're listening to this, right? So you're trying to better yourself. Learn from as many people as possible. Find what they did to get to where they are. Figure out what resonates with you, what doesn't. But it starts with the desire to want that. And I think everything else will start to fall into place after.
Amazing. Karim, thank you so much.
Of course, pleasure's mine. I publish a free weekly newsletter that helps leaders accelerate their learning. So if folks are interested in that, they can absolutely subscribe through my website. Just trying to continue to educate, uplift, and motivate other people along their journey.
That's awesome, man. I'll make sure to drop the link in the bio.
Of course.
Amazing. All right. Thank you so much. And have a good day, brother.
You too.